Kent Adams here, and welcome to Experts at EWU. And I've enjoyed this series simply because they surprise me with some of the, number one, fantastic professors out there, but number two, some of the subjects that I'm not sure I ever really would have thought much about, except there's been some controversy related to what we're going to talk about today. And my guest is Jenifer Walke. Did I get it right?
It's actually a silent E, so just walk, but that's okay.
Okay. Well, you can see we've not practiced this. This is live and recorded live and so forth. You are an assistant professor of biology at EWU, but that's not your first gig, is it? You've had quite a bit of education in the university levels and some experiences at teaching and so forth. Let's start off by, for the first minute or two, talking about you and your background, because I think it's quite interesting.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. I started off in research as a microbial and disease ecology as an undergraduate student at James Madison University.
Okay.
And I've always been interested in human health as well as ecosystem health. So when my undergraduate ecology professor invited me to do research, I was really excited for the opportunity. So I started off doing research, specifically looking at the role of skin bacteria on salamanders and how that influences their nesting behavior.
And it's not like
And
everybody's doing that research, right?
right, it's pretty specific,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I got into that and was just blown away by the microbial world. So if you look at the tree of life, only the tiny tip of one of the little branches is visible, things like plants and animals, and the rest of life is microbial, which is just really fascinating. So that's kind of what got me into research, and also how we can kind of harness the power of microbes and for conservation of biodiversity. And so I got into that, and then I worked for 2 years as a research technician in that same lab that I did my undergrad work in after I graduated. And I just remember the feeling of presenting my research, for the first time, and just being really excited and knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I went to Virginia Tech for my PhD in biological sciences, where I continued the amphibians, skin bacteria, and disease resistance work. And when I graduated, I then wanted to do some teaching. So I did some teaching at Roanoke College in Virginia for a year, which is a small liberal arts school in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. And then I went back to Virginia Tech to do more postdoctoral research. And that's where I got into the bee research that I'm sure we'll talk about today as well. So I did that, and then came to Eastern, where I'm really excited to be here, where I can continue with my research and also teaching as well. So it's a good mix of both of those things that I enjoy.
We don't talk about that too often about Eastern, meaning the research side of things. And I know when we began the conversation with EWU almost a year ago about doing a series, that was part of the discussion, was to say, yes, that we have the professors, but we're not well known about the research, but there's research going on, and which is, I think, good for the university, but it's good for the students and everything. One of the things you said that kind of caught my attention about getting into and learning and getting excited about some of the science and so forth, isn't it fun to discover what you really didn't know before, that you really like it now and it's branched off into something new? I mean, did you ever think as a teenager that you would be doing this?
No, right.
Yeah.
That's something that I definitely, learned that by just having those experiences, in
Yes.
the field, rainy night, searching for salamanders, or, in the lab, like culturing bacteria over and over and over again, and doing experiments, and then, finding the results is like super exciting. But then also kind of maybe more exciting is actually sharing that with others,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and going to scientific conferences and talking to other scientists about what you've been working on and getting new ideas from them, but then also, you know, talking with the public, which is why I'm really excited to be here too,
Yeah.
and kind of sharing, you know, my work as a scientist and what I'm finding, but, you know, making people aware of that. I think is a really important aspect of being a, you know, a teacher scholar, is to actually, you know, share what we're doing in the research lab with others.
And at some point, you know you're going to excite other young women and men at your school to get into this area and discover what you've discovered. It,
Yes, that is very rewarding
yeah.
to, you know, I always, in the classroom when I'm teaching, I always talk about, you know, my research and research of my colleagues too, as, you know, to demonstrate that we're actually discovering new things every day. And there's stuff in the textbook, but then, you know, we're finding things that are challenging that, and sharing those new discoveries with students in the classroom is really
Right.
rewarding. And then seeing how they, you know, might not even realize themselves about a career in scientific research, and just know that that's an option, and to kind of give them experiences. So in my research lab right now, I have, you know, 3 graduate students working on their master's degrees, and I
Wow.
have, you know, a handful of undergraduate students that are also involved in this too. So that's really important.
And I think we need to expose our young people to a variety of things, even if they don't go into it, because it sets them up to ask questions in life later, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point.
Yeah. Hey, I've got to ask a question. You talked about all these communities of invisible microbes and what's
Mhm.
around us, and that we only see a part of that.
Mhm.
Take us into your world, and what are you seeing a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, from the moment we're born, we're colonized by thousands of microorganisms that we can't necessarily see, but we can see what they do for
Right.
us. And of course, we're seeing that now with the coronavirus pandemic, that some of these microbes do cause disease.
Right.
You know, thinking of these bacteria, fungi, viruses in the case of the coronavirus. And so, of course, they cause disease, but the reality is that most microbes um, don't cause disease. They're harmless. And in fact, many are actually beneficial. So they're beneficial for ecosystems in terms of nutrient cycling, things like carbon cycling and nitrogen cycling for
Right.
our entire ecosystem. And then for us, human health and the health of other animals and plants is that they do a lot of things for us. So they help metabolize and digest our food. They help make vitamins that, you know, we can't necessarily make ourselves, that are helpful for us. They also prime and stimulate our immune system so that we can better be protected against invading pathogens. Um, they also can, you know, directly protect us from pathogenic disease-causing organisms, you know, through stimulating the immune system, but then also, you know, producing chemicals that can actually inhibit the growth of these
Right.
disease-causing organisms. So there's kind of like chemical warfare going on and chemical signaling between, you know, our microbes and our systems, our nervous system, immune system, but also amongst the other microbes that are in this environment. So yes, those are some of the things that they do for us in our world
Yeah.
that, you know, we can certainly see the outcomes, even if we can't actually see the organisms themselves.
Right. I think there's. Well, let me ask it this way of you: are you seeing more interest in this area now with the COVID-19, and the alarm bells have gone off, and we now realize that things we never thought of before, the average person out there, you did, but the average person didn't think about all of this, and now we want to know where the good ones are, and how we prevent the bad ones, and so forth. So are you getting more questions from friends and others at school and so forth?
Yeah, a little bit. And actually, it was really fascinating to be teaching microbiology last winter. So, kind of from January to March when things were really happening. And so I was teaching a microbiology class, and every day in class there was something new that we learned about this virus. I just remember, the first few days, like, oh yeah, there's this virus in China, and then, when it first came to North America and in Washington. And so then we would talk about that. We would talk about where it came from. And so, yes, it's been actually it was an interesting timing to have that class and talk about it with my students. And yeah, I would say another thing that kind of over the years, not necessarily, more recently with coronavirus time, but even before that, the interest in microbiology research has increased quite a bit. And a lot of it has to do with because the molecular tools that we're able to study them better. Yes. Because the majority of microbes can't be cultured with regular standard microbiology techniques. And so it's really difficult to study them. But now there are new molecular techniques to do DNA sequencing of these microbes. So we can then identify them and study them using molecular tools. And that's advancing, again, like nearly every day, there's a new technology. The technology I started with as a young PhD student is now obsolete, and we're on to better things that, are kind of discovering entire new groups of microbes with that technique. So that's another thing that, I've been able to kind of see even in my time working in microbiology that's changed.
And you have to keep up on all that.
Yeah.
And what today is going to be different tomorrow on Friday the 13th. Yes. But it's going to be different, isn't it? I mean, we just, And how much easier do you see that probably as a good direction as we start to go down the road, that we can maybe prevent some things, we can cure things faster. It's all going to help lead to that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that, because we are discovering, especially the beneficial roles of some microorganisms, and how we can kind of think about probiotic bacteria that can prevent disease, but also help with, digestion or metabolizing toxins, for example. So yeah, I think that, and there's also whole microbial communities that, maybe it's not just one key bacteria, but it's sort of a complex of a couple different types of bacteria. And so figuring out what that is and how that varies for, different individuals. So thinking about, personalized medicine for different individuals, because there is a lot of variation across individuals in terms of their microbiome and how protective it can be. And so understanding that, and then kind of engineering microbiomes for individuals. And that's something that we're interested in with the bee research, is trying to, figure out what that healthy microbiome is, and then engineer it and be able to apply it to other individuals that don't have that protective microbiome, and then experimentally test if that is in fact protective. And so that's some of the National Science Foundation work that we're doing right now to try to understand those interactions.
Do you just feel excited that you're on that cutting edge, and that we're going to see some really great outcomes in the next few years?
Yeah, it is very exciting to be involved in this research. I'm definitely, part of a larger team of researchers across the globe that are tackling similar issues. And so, yeah, I'm really, really happy to, be a part of that. And it's a great motivation to have, not only the discovery of something new, but to have an application potentially that can protect wildlife as well as, human health too, indirectly.
Yeah. Speaking of wildlife and everything else, we all know enough from our high school chemistry, biology classes and science classes and so forth, the importance of bees in our agriculture and in flowers and you name it. But a lot of things are happening, and some things have been happening to bees, not only in our country but around the world. Bring us up to date where things are going right now.
Yeah, so bees are very important pollinators for native plants. They're also really important for food security, and because they are such important pollinators for our food supply. So you might have seen, some of those side-by-side diagrams of like what a grocery store would look like with bees or without bees, and how, it basically takes away all of the food that, bees are used for pollination of those foods. And so, it would be very different food supply.
Well, my breakfast cereal is going to go away, wouldn't
it? Yeah. Lots of fruits and nuts and vegetables. Yeah. So they're important for that. And they are experiencing a lot of threats, just like a lot of other organisms on our planet are.
From exposure. What are the threats?
Yeah. So there's a handful of them, and kind of researchers are finding that, there's not one single problem for the bees. It's sort of like a combination of multiple things, including exposure to pesticide chemicals that are used commonly in agriculture. That's one thing, but of course we can maybe increase the communication between pesticide applicators and beekeepers. So there are measures that beekeepers can then protect their bees if there is communication and they kind of know when and where that's happening. But there is that threat, pesticide exposure. Also access to good food supply. So floral diversity. They like different types of flowers so they can get their nectar and pollen from. And so that is becoming harder and harder to come by as habitat changes. And there's sort of like this, monoculture agriculture system where it's just sort of mass areas of like one single type.
If it works here, it works there, and just everyone does the same.
Yeah, as opposed to having like diverse different types of plants and flowers in an area that's good for the bees. So they don't have as much access to a diversity of
So who do you educate on that to make some of those changes out there? Is it the farmer? Is it the applicator? Is it the community itself?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of that. And like I said, like communication can go a long way, and just, making sure that people are aware of when things are happening can have a significant impact on the health and the outcome. And so that's part of it. Also, and that's thinking kind of like larger scale, but also smaller scale and community members. There's a lot of things that people can do, just as far as trying to limit the use of chemical, on your lawns, and kind of changing our mindset to like what is a beautiful lawn, can be helpful. There's, planting diversity of flowers in even just your yard, but also in terms of agriculture, there's a lot of research on kind of incorporating flower strips in the larger agricultural field. And that there's research that suggests that can be really important. And there's a lot of great research.
That just seems so simple, doesn't it?
Yeah,
almost as a simple answer, Yeah.
And then the other thing that bees are threatened by are diseases too. So they have, there's fungal disease and viral disease, and a lot of the viruses are actually transmitted by these parasitic mites. So how like ticks kind of attach to our skin. So there's mites that sort of attach to the exoskeleton of the bees, and then they consume their the fat bodies of the bees, and also transmit viruses. So disease is also a threat to bees, and not only honeybees, but also native bees too, which are really important for ecosystems. And there's a lot of research too on kind of the interaction between native bees and then honeybees too, and how sometimes they can transmit diseases, but they might also be able to transmit beneficial microbes as well. And so that is, and bees are spread around beehives as part of the pollination services. They're trucked all across, the country. And so there's a lot of movement. And so with that you can get increase in disease transmission as
Right.
well. Just like we see with, the coronavirus, an increase in globalization and travel can spread it
Right.
pretty quickly.
Right.
Similar thing with the bees. And so that might be something that, beekeepers can try to keep track of and try to limit if there are, diseased hives too.
Right. Okay, so bees are kind of on that list, but other, I'm going to call them animals, and I'm probably right. You'll correct me. But what else out there is on that endangered list?
Yeah, well, so I also study amphibians, and that's what I got interested in originally. And so it's like frogs and salamanders,
Okay.
and they are considered the most vulnerable and threatened vertebrate
Really?
animal because of the scale of the amphibian decline crisis. There's 8,000 amphibian species on our planet, and almost half of them are either extinct in the wild or threatened with extinction.
Oh, wow.
So they are very vulnerable to a lot of things like habitat loss and pollution, just like a lot of other organisms. But there is a fungal skin disease in particular that has been devastating amphibian populations around the world. So they are, and people might not, be like, okay, well, amphibians, you don't see them very often.
Right,
They
right.
kind of hide out underground a lot. It's like, well, what are they actually doing? But they actually play a critical role in ecosystems across the world. They are kind of like an intermediate link in food webs. And so they're kind of like right in the middle. So when amphibian populations crash, so do the predator populations that
Okay.
they use the amphibians to eat. So, snakes and birds crash as well. And then insects are sort of, under them on the food
Yeah.
web. And so then, if you get rid of the frogs and salamanders, you actually can have increase in insect populations, which many of insect
We
populations can
we don't think
transmit.
about all this, do we? I mean,
I
you do,
know, I
but the rest
know.
of us don't think about the impact we have.
Yeah. And so basically, if you get rid of that central link, then you're having what we call a trophic cascade of events that, impacts all different organisms. And so they're really important, even though we might not see them all the time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are kind of at the stage of, well, we don't study this. If we don't see it, it must not exist. We don't
yeah,
care.
yeah,
But it's all
yeah,
intermingled, and one depends on the other. And if we
yeah.
don't see part of that, we just don't think about it. Um, okay, so what are you and the EWU lab doing to help with all of this, and what kinds of studies are you doing with your students
Yeah.
and those going for their PhD and so forth? Because I know you're cooking up something out there, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I'm really fortunate to have really great students on different projects. So we have projects with amphibians here in the Pacific Northwest region, there's not a ton of work in this region. So that's one thing that we're really excited to do. And so we've partnered with, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game and did a pretty large scale survey of amphibian populations in the northern Idaho Panhandle, and found a correlation between the types of bacteria and how much of each of these types of bacteria is on their skin, and then whether or not they have this disease. So there's a correlation between the microbiome and disease in this study. And so having those partnerships has been really great with them. And then we're also working out at the Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge. And we actually just recently found that the chytrid fungus that's causing declines in amphibians around the world is there. And we
Wow.
found that certain species of frogs have more of it than others. So we found that. And no, as far as we are aware, no one has really looked at that, of the presence of the fungus in Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge. So
Right.
we're excited to figure that out. And then again, like now we're working in isolating different types of bacteria and testing them against the fungus in the lab to see if they're producing chemicals that can kill the fungus in the lab, and then see if we see patterns that translate, in the field, to, potentially use them as probiotic bacteria. And the idea with the probiotic bacteria is that we wouldn't necessarily be, introducing new bacteria to the environment. These bacteria are already there on the animals, and it's just kind of increasing the amount of it or the prevalence to
Which
be
ones
protected.
work and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about our audience, but I've learned a lot. And that could be because of my age, too. I love learning new things, but I know you've got students that do, too. And I'm going to guess out there, people watching this will go, I'd like to learn more. But my question is, those that watch this video, what can they do to help with this process? Because
Yes.
that's what it comes down to. Are there things that we can do? And you kind of mentioned a couple things through there. But if you can give one or two things that people can walk away and go, I think I could do that.
Yeah, I would say, and we touched on this, but just sharing this with others, right? So thinking about it, like, if you learn something new, then tell someone else who can tell someone else, and just bringing awareness to these issues that threaten biodiversity, which also can threaten human health too. And what we're studying in these systems is parallel to human health, like more directly, and so just kind of sharing that and spreading the awareness about these issues would be kind of what I would say would be the number one takeaway. But also just as you're thinking about being mindful with chemical usage in the environment, and also thinking about ways that you can plant different plants and flowers that are beneficial to the organisms in that habitat.
Outstanding. That I was thinking of things like that as you were going through it. I'm thinking of, okay, my front lawn might not be as green as before, because she said there's some advantage to that. That means less chemicals and so forth, and plants that I don't want to attract too many bees because my wife is allergic to them, but out by the sidewalk maybe, or something, you know what I mean? And things like that we can all do, and we can ask when we go to the nursery, what are the plants, what are the things, and get some help from there as well. And just be between the two plants, this one benefits our system out there.
Yeah, and I would just say that a lot of the local beekeeping associations, like the West Plains Beekeeping Association, on their website, they actually have a list of plants that are good for beneficial pollinators. So definitely check that out too.
Yeah, we can all do the research these days, because we've really become efficient at home on our computers, haven't we?
Yes.
Did you know Zoom before we started all this?
Not really. I had used it a few times for certain meetings that, people, if certain people couldn't come, but, most people would still be in person, but there'd be, one or two people remote. But now it's
everybody I talk to now, well, I didn't know it before, I do now. I think we've all taken lessons, haven't we?
Yeah.
This has been most interesting. Thank you for what you're doing out there and being part of our Spokane area community and so forth. You're teaching a lot from home, but my guess is that some of the stuff you have to go to the lab to do, don't you?
Yes, that is true. We are able to do limited in-person research in the lab, so we can keep that going using certain COVID protocols. So we do have that, but all of our actual classes are still online.
Yeah, and probably will be for a while as we go through all of this.
The winter quarter. We haven't heard about the spring, but yeah.
Well, thank you for being part of Experts at EWU. As I said, I learn something new each time. I'm going to be so smart. Now I need to go back. Maybe I could qualify for my master's from having all of you on, Anyways, thank you very much. What interests me the most is, and this comes from being a father and a grandfather, is that you found something that really excites you and you love going to work every day, don't you? Yeah.
I do, yes.
And not all of us find that, but I see that in you and hear that from you loud and clear. And that will obviously come through with your students as well. So congratulations on doing that. And thank you for being part of Experts at EWU.
Well, thank you for having me.
You have a good day. And all of you watching, have a good day, everybody.